What? What? You're back for another one? What? We're at part 6? Goodness me, you guys love this stuff. And in a weird way, I'm kind of grateful. There's no shortage of evil people. From promising kings turned sour to some of the worst in World War II. Today's list is another installment that proves that there is no shortage of evil in this world. Welcome back, Top 10 fam. I'm your host, as usual, Rachel Fisher, and join me as we count down our list of top 10 evil people from history we wish weren't born, part 6. Let's go. Number 10, Ferdinand the First, King of Naples. Ferdinand, what a name. You had so much promise, but then you had to go ahead and take the phrase, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer, way too literally. Everyone was so excited when Ferdinand first became King of Naples. He was smart, courageous, confident. He had all the promise of being a wonderful king, but then the power must have gotten to his head or something, or he was really insecure, because soon his intent turned cruel and malicious, especially if you were on his bad side. Ferdinand liked to have dinner parties with his enemies and loved them so much he wanted them to stay forever. He would imprison them, even throw them out of windows before retrieving their corpse and staging them in what he called the Black Museum. I know, Black Mirror, right? He had them embalmed and then dressed in the clothing they wore while alive and placed at the dinner table like they were enjoying a banquet. To all those on his good side, his so-called Black Museum became a grim warning should he ever be crossed. If he suspected any of his subjects were going to betray him, he would even invite them to visit the museum so they could see where they might end up. Charming. Number 9, Hernan Cortes. There are several reasons as to why this man was the absolute worst of the time. The Spanish conquistador left blood wherever he went. 1. He decimated the Aztec Empire with his forces and slaughtered thousands of defenseless people. 2. He was rumored to have taken the life of his wife and enslaved over 20 Mesoamerican women to be his concubines against their will. Yay. 3. He also exploited Aztec and indigenous political systems for his own gain, even imprisoning a king in his own home. Number 4. He, along with his fellow explorers, gave them blankets infecting the population with smallpox. Whether they knew this would happen remains up for debate. The history of colonialism is bloody and cruel in a lot of ways, with Hernan Cortes being one of the cruelest. It's strange to think that much of what we know today wouldn't exist without conquistadors like Cortes, but I always wish that things never went the way they did. But as many people on this list prove, we are not short on cruelty in the history of the world. Number 8, Emperor Zhengde. So almost immediately, people didn't love this guy when he rose to power. Imagine being in a monarchy, it's just like a roll of the die. Is he gonna be crazy or is he gonna be sane? We just don't know. Firstly, there was a rumor that he wasn't a legitimate heir and that he was born by one of the queen's handmaidens, not the actual queen. But he took full advantage of his role and became one of the most notorious leaders during the Ming Dynasty. His court lived in constant fear, as many of his upright officials were purged and taken out. He didn't have much interest in courtly affairs and wanted instead to become a military general. He had a crowd of eunuchs that followed him everywhere, to whom he entrusted many government matters. They were very corrupt. He also liked to give orders to his imaginary double named General Zhu Shao. He left his court to be entirely run by his eunuchs, who allowed corruption and terror to breed, while he retired to pleasures in his own castle. He was also known for demanding cruel punishment, such as that which he did to one of his eunuchs, who wronged him. Number 7, King John. I'm actually reading a book about him and his brother right now, which is really interesting. King John wanted so badly to be remembered, but he just reeked so bad of desperation that he stunk up all of history. King John was so awful, he became immortalized as the main villain in the tale of Robin Hood. For a long time, John lived in the shadow of his terrifying and mighty older brother, Richard the Lionheart. But then Richard had to go off to reclaim the Holy Land, leaving the throne empty. Kind of. Despite attempts to prevent John from weaseling his way onto the throne in Richard's absence, John did so anyway, and no one could stop his cruelty. Richard died in 1199 from gangrene, and John began his reign. Let's see, where do we begin? Well, he took the life of his own nephew. He starved whoever he considered an enemy, including the wife of one of his best friends. He repeatedly retreated in battle because he was such a coward. He extorted and exploited his own country by enforcing ridiculous taxes and much more. He had to be forced forced to sign the Magna Carta, a charter of rights that remains one of the most pivotal documents in history. So needless to say, where his brother Richard established a legacy of heroism and valor, John did the exact opposite. Number 6, Attila the Hun. Attila, more like I'll kill you the Hun. He left a bloody and horrific legacy throughout his reign and conquest across Europe in the 5th century. Born in 406 AD, Attila was sent to the Roman court at the age of 12 as a hostage. Sometime between then and adulthood, Attila grew into a ruthless king who took the life of his own brother before embarking on his violent conquest. He pillaged over 100 cities and even arrived at the gates of Rome. It was his reign that plunged much of Europe into the Dark Ages. Like, he is responsible for that. The attacks his armies made were so horrifying that the name Attila became synonymous with chaos, destruction, and death. To the Romans, the Huns were barbarians led by the Scourge of God, yet another name for Attila. His rampage was so fast and vast that the empire just couldn't sustain itself. Eventually his rule ended, but there was a weird moment where a Roman princess named Honoraria sent him a ring and asked for him to help her escape. So there was like a weird romance happening. She was engaged to someone she didn't want to be married to, and she thought Attila was a better choice. I don't know. Attila claimed her as his betrothed, though he had like 20 wives already. God, leave some for the rest of them, you know? Though he was inevitably denied, he went on another bloody crusade because he was so heartbroken, but looks like he didn't really need that much encouraging. Number 5, Oskar Dirlewanger. The 36th Grenadier Division under the SS in World War II Germany was an experimental division that used hardened criminals as enforcers, and they were led by one horrendous man, Oskar Dirlewanger. He was a veteran from World War I and started out as a volunteer for the SS until he began to abuse his superiors. A 1942 Reich police said, and I quote, that he was a mentally unstable, violent fanatic and alcoholic who had the habit of erupting into violence under the influence of drugs. That was somebody from World War II Germany saying that about him. You know what I mean? They were so evil and they said that about him. Right? He was thrown in prison, and that should have been the last anyone heard of him. But then, SS official Gottlob Berger got a hold of him. They served together in World War I, and they were buddies, and Berger pulled him from prison and sent him to fight. This led to his position as the leader of the Grenadier Division, aka the Dirlewanger Unit. His unit was made up of some of the worst criminals imaginable, and as a result, they were responsible for the torment of civilians without discrimination. All the most horrific things you can think of. Eventually though, Dirlewanger was captured by the French and handed off to the Polish to be finished off. They tormented him for days until he finally died on June 5th in 1945 from the injuries he sustained while being interrogated. So it feels like a fitting end in a weird way. So kind of satisfying, but because he was awful, truly. I left out a lot of the stuff, but just Google it. You'll see. Number 4, Michael Swango. This one, the case of Michael Swango is not only horrifying because of what he did, but also because of how long it took for him to get caught and for it to stop. It's insane. A serial poisoner, Michael Swango, swindled and lied his way into the medical field, leaving a trail of bodies behind him. First of all, this man kept a scrapbook of car crashes and horrific accidents, and even admired the poisoning techniques used in concentration camps in World War II. Red flags went off all over the place during his training in medical school, with patients mysteriously dying every time they touched him. He was nicknamed 007 with the catchphrase "License to Kill," but nobody did anything. In one case, one of the survivors directly implicated him when she said he injected her with something right before she underwent violent seizures. But he was exonerated because the hospital didn't want the press. Ugh! Then he was hired again and again at several places and poisoned staff on 2 separate occasions with first fried chicken and then donuts. He was caught, finally, sentenced to 5 years, released after 2 for unknown reasons, and then started working under aliases. He traveled to you can tell this makes me really mad. You can tell this makes me really mad because nobody did background checks. He traveled to Africa, and after a trail of bodies started turning up there, police found massive stores of poison in his home. Oh yeah, and before he left for Africa, he stole all of his girlfriend's money and she took her own life because of it. He was finally caught in 1997 and is serving 3 consecutive life sentences. Number 3, Hermann Goering. I don't know why he hasn't been on part 2 or 3, but he's here now. He was one of evil Charlie Chaplin's main henchmen, one of the leaders of the National Socialist Party. His role in organizing the police state in Germany and establishing concentration camps for corrective treatments is primarily what he's remembered for. And what a legacy. He was beside the German dictator since the very beginning and even participated in the party's first attempt to take over the German government in the failed Beer Hall Putsch. It was during that event that Goering was severely injured and developed an addiction to morphine for the rest of his life. Fun fact. But honestly, I don't care. He was awful. No pity for the guy, because you know what's also a fun fact? He organized the Night of the Long Knives, where he, along with the SS, assassinated 85 members of the political opposition. Yeah, he was so loved by the Führer that he was even declared his successor until he tried to take the position early in 1939 and was placed under house arrest by the Führer. Goering stood trial and was condemned to death after the war, though he took his own life via cyanide the night before his execution. So we never really got the full justice, but we almost got there. Okay, number 2. I've done 6 of these lists, and you'd think I'd become numb to it, kind of at this point, but when I read about this man, I felt like I'd be kicked in the stomach, so fair warning. It seems as though the evil experiments in German World War II camps never ends. Karl Clauberg was a gynecologist who, prior to the war, was actually trying to help infertile women conceive. You may want to stop here if this is a sensitive subject for you. As you can guess, he did the opposite as soon as he landed in the concentration camps. He joined the National Socialist Party in 1938. He soon approached another evil man, Heinrich Himmler, who we've talked about in previous videos, and requested permission to experiment on sterilization procedures. He wanted to see if there was a way to perform sterilization on a large group of people in a short amount of time. He injected thousands of women with toxins without anesthesia, which resulted in extreme pain and most often death. Sometimes he would even take their lives just so he would have a cadaver to research. His place of work was Auschwitz, and then after the Soviets moved in, he moved to Ravensbrück concentration camp. Finally, he was caught by the Soviets and sentenced to 25 years in prison. He was soon released to stand trial in Germany, but he died before he could be sentenced in 1957. Number 1, Lenin. The worse, the better. Vladimir Lenin is one of the most controversial people on this list. A kind of inspirational tyrant, Vladimir Lenin founded the Russian Communist Party, led the Bolshevik Revolution, and was the mind behind the Soviet state. He has in fact been regarded as one of the greatest revolutionary leaders in history, so like why the heck is he on this list? Lenin's Soviet Union led the way for people such as Joseph Stalin to oppress and brutalize their own people by establishing a society that suffocated freedom. One of the most horrific events he was responsible for was the Red Terror. The Red Terror was a state-sponsored wave of cutthroat brutality that spanned from September 1918 until 1922. In an attempt to maintain control, Lenin's Bolsheviks used terror to silence any opposition. Thousands, even millions potentially, were forced into concentration camps, which ended in their execution. Lenin's foundation of state-sanctioned violence would lead to millions of deaths throughout his leadership, and of course, his predecessors, especially Joseph Stalin. So that's why he's number 1. And that was our list for today. If you want a part 7, you know what to do. I've been your host, Rachel Fisher, and if you like this video, like, subscribe, comment, do the thing. I've been your host, Rachel Fisher, and until next time, take care.